Hello, I'm Gabrielle Beebe, your Adult Services Library Specialist. Welcome to the author interview for this year's Jefferson County Community Read. Molly Gloss is a fourth-generation Oregonian from Portland. She's the author of 5 novels, The Jump Off Creek, The Dazzle of Day, Wildlife, The Hearts of Horses, and Falling from Horses, and one collection of stories named Unforeseen. Her awards include the Oregon Book Award, a Pacific Northwest Booksellers Award, the Penn West Fiction Prize, the James Tiptree Jr. Award, and a Whiting Writers Award, and her short story, Lambing Season, was a finalist for the Hugo and Nebula Awards. Her work often concerns the landscape, literature, mythology, and life of the American West. Molly, how did Hearts of Horses begin for you as the inspiration and the original vision for the finished work?
The original idea for the book actually happened many, many years ago. I was doing some research for the Jump Off Creek.
Yeah.
And I was reading Teresa Jordan's collection of oral histories called Women in the West. No, Cowgirls, Women in the West. Reading one of those oral histories, an older woman talking about her childhood on a ranch in the 1910s. And she said, and I can almost quote her because I used a paraphrase of this sentence as the opening sentence of my novel. She said, in those days there were girls who came through the country breaking horses. They were usually alone. They would have a horse or two with them they were taking home to break or that they'd won as payment for work they'd done. They were good girls. I don't know what they charged. And I wrote down all those notes thinking that that would be a great idea for a novel, a girl who's breaking horses in the 1910s. And then those notes sat in a notebook for 20 years, I guess. I don't know, a long time anyway. Because I just couldn't see how to write a story about that girl. Nothing sort of accreted around it. And so the notes just lay there. But then many, many years later, my husband had died. I wasn't writing. I was doing a lot of comfort rereading. And I reread a novel I had loved when I was a teenager, which is a novel called Diamond Hitch. Diamond Hitch is it's a cowboy novel. It's a better piece of literature than most Louis L'Amour, for example, but it's not at the level of, let's say, Willa Cather. It's somewhere in between. But it was a very comforting novel, and it was mostly about a rodeo guy. But there was one chapter toward the end where he took winter work breaking horses for a bunch of farmers and ranchers. And he did it by riding a circle ride, starting at one ranch in the morning on one horse, going to the next ranch and the next, changing horses at each place. I have never seen a circle ride written about anywhere else than in that novel. I had forgotten about it. In rereading it, I remembered, oh, right, the circle ride. I don't know if it even really is a true thing because that's the only place I've ever read about it, but it made sense to me. And as soon as I reread it, I thought about that girl who breaks horses. If I put my girl on a circle ride, then I have a novel, because then it's a novel about all the people on the circle. And that was the beginning of that novel.
Oh, wow. Why the job of horse gentling, as I've seen it put? What drew you specifically to that process, and what research did you undertake to understand it more?
Well, the idea that a girl might be breaking horses rather than a man bucking them out, appealed to me because I'm always interested in writing about the untold stories about the American West, and a lot of those stories are women, the women's stories that have been left out of our history and our literature. So So the idea that I would write about a girl breaking horses was really appealing to me just on its face. And of course, I had been a typical horse-loving girl. So, and this gave me a reason and an opportunity to get back into horses, because of course I do a lot of research, and the research for this, I knew that I had to get close to horses for the research. So I was glad about that. It gave me a good reason to get back with horses.
And how did you go about getting back in with horses?
Well, first I took some horseback riding lessons from a barn out in Forest Grove, and then I started contacting friends of mine who were horse people, and then I went down to Burns, to the BLM, the Wild Horse Corrals, and there I met Leslie Newman, who does demonstrations for the BLM when they're doing their horse adoption events. She does a demonstration to show you how you can start a wild Mustang. And I became a Leslie Newman groupie. I followed her around a bit and watched her do this with many, many horses. Finally talked to her, told her what I was working on, asked her if she'd be interested in teaching me how to do a little bit of what she does. I don't want to be a horse trainer, but I wanted to get a feeling for it. So as I jokingly always say, she did not have good legal advice because she said yes. I'm sure if anybody had told her what was safe and not safe, she would have not said yes. But so we agreed to meet in Klamath Falls, and we worked on a horse there that was a young Mustang that a friend of hers had just adopted. And I started that colt with Leslie sort of coaching me from the corral rails. It took me parts of 3 days to do what Leslie can do in about an hour, but I did it. It was really fun. And then the people at the BLM pointed me toward Corrine Elzer, who was a young horse breaker, horse trainer in the Burns area. So on a different trip, I met with Corrine and watched her work with horses and talked to her quite a bit, which was an odd moment because I had already written in my novel a scene where Martha breaks her wrist and doesn't want to get a cast on it because it will slow down her horse breaking adventure. And here was Corrine. She had a wrapped up wrist because she'd sprained her wrist and didn't want to get a cast on it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was pretty bizarre.
In the process of your research, as you got more into talking to people, had anyone else mentioned a circle ride? Or heard?
No, never. So, maybe I made it up. I mean, I didn't make it up. The novelist who wrote Diamond Hitch made it up. It just makes sense to me that it would work, so I'm just going with it, that it must have been a thing that people did, but I don't know. I don't know that for sure.
How did the book change for you during the writing process of it all?
I actually used Black Beauty, the novel Black Beauty, as a sort of template for, not so much for plot, but what I did was sort of each of the people on Martha's Circle there's something about them, some spark or bit about their character that relates to one of the many people that had Black Beauty. Black Beauty, is a series of owners that, in a way, is a circle ride for beauty, going around to all these various owners. So that's kind of what I did with the novel, was sort of base those characters on the people who had owned beauty. And I'd not ever done that before in a novel, sort of using using an old novel as a template for the plot, the development of the plot. But I wouldn't say that much changed during the writing of the novel. I had an idea when I began, and I went straight through for it, so not much changed in that respect.
Mentioning the characters, Community was almost a character of itself in your book.
Yeah. Thanks.
Was that?
I'm glad you noticed.
I mean, the characters are all different and very specific, but in small ways, and they create an overall community. Was that intended from the beginning to play such a large part in your book?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think I've tried to do in all my writing about the American West is to push back against the heroic solitary cowboy hero.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that really our genuine history of the West is a history of community and developing community. It's not about the solitary hero. So I'm always looking for ways for that to show up in my novels, for it not to be about the solitary hero, but instead about the community of people that help that hero to thrive and do what it is that he or she does.
Do you think there's an aspect you created of the community in Elwha County that translates well today to the modern times, or that you feel like you would like to see in modern times?
Well, boy, in our current political climate with so much division, I wish that more urban people were able to talk to rural people about their lives, their small town environment, their communities. I think we need to bridge that more than we do. That's one thing I wish would happen. I don't know that my novel is going to be that bridge, but I think that urban people who read about small town Elwha County might see possibilities there, I would hope.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Did you make the decision at the outset to include or address certain kind of contemporary subjects in Hearts of Horses, or did they just feel like a natural part of the time you were setting it in? Like it talks about war, there's even race, gender, community prejudices, even marital relationships?
Yeah.
Or did they just came out of it?
Well, some of them, of course, naturally are part of the story, because anytime you talk about a woman, a girl, she's 19, a girl breaking horses, you're already talking about gender boundaries, because we always think of the cowboy as the one who's out there bucking them out. But in fact, I'll get back to the question about politics in a minute, but let me talk about gender for a minute. That I made Martha a big girl. She's almost 6 foot. She's strong, and I did that on purpose because I really thought I might have to have her bucking them out. You know, I thought that might be how everybody did it in the 1910s. But I'm a diligent researcher, so here we are with the library. I really love the WorldCat, the website. Yes. WorldCat. Partly because it has such a great search function, so you can search for copyright dates even, yes, as a parameter. So I searched for horse breaking, horse training, those kind of phrases, but searching for copyright dates that were like from 1910 to 1925. Yes. Looking to see if I didn't know if there were any books written about horse training back then. I didn't know if maybe I would be lucky to get one, but instead I get a list of, dozens of books that were written back then about horse training. So I sent for several from libraries far away, and realized in doing all this reading that, hey, everything we now think of as, horse whispering was known. None of it is new invention. It was known all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and certainly in the 1910s, very well known in the 1910s. It was not that people didn't know about it. It was that the cowboys on ranches in the West often well, they disagreed with it. It's not that they didn't know about it. They disagreed with it. They thought, we need to get these horses broken quickly, and this is how we do it. You know, we break them, we break their spirit. That's what you want to do. But girls and women, being less strong, had other ideas about how to do that. And so they were adopting methods that were out there that people knew about. They were using those methods right off the bat. And it turns out there were, as is indicated by that quote from Teresa Jordan's memoir, lots of girls and women who were breaking horses. In fact, it turns out often on a ranch, it was the dad and the sons who were going out working the cattle, but they had the daughter at home gentling the horses. So that was the first surprise, and then I was able to give Martha a different sort of way of working with the horses. I didn't have to have her bucking them out at all. But then to the political part, that was kind of a surprise, because I was just doing a lot of research about the home front in 1917, 1918, and realized, well, this is World War I, and there were lots of parallels, it turned out, because when I was writing this novel, I was writing it right after the Patriot Act was passed, and when we were at war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and there were so many parallels to what had been happening in World War I. There was a Patriot Act passed in World War I that was very, very similar to what we were dealing with after the Middle East War. And the prejudice against Germans back in World War I, which paralleled the prejudice against anyone who looked Middle Eastern. The whole thing about trying to get, we were trying to get other countries to support us in our war in Iraq, and people were saying, we're not going to eat French fries anymore because France won't support us. We're going to call them freedom fries. This is exactly what happened in World War I as well, with German prejudice. So that was just like a gift to me, in a way, to discover that there were so many parallels. It makes the book more relevant to contemporary issues. I didn't have to reach at all for it. It was just there. Yeah.
Oh, that is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
How important was it to you that Hearts of Horses be accurately anchored in its historical air? Like, as far as, were you set out with the goal to make a mostly accurate, or sometimes there are authors who get really hung up on the small historical details. At what level do you think you were at? Yeah.
I want it to be right. I want to recreate a time and a place that I think is as close to what it would have been like as I can get there. And so I do a deep, deep dive in research to get there. And one of the maybe unexpected ways of doing that is to read novels that actually were written at that time. Reading novels written in 1917 that were contemporary novels of 1917 is a huge underserved source of research, because there's so much in it about that you might not have expected. Ice cream cones, carnivals, Ferris wheels. I mean, all kinds of things that you maybe wouldn't have imagined even existed in 1917 that are in those novels that tell you how people felt about their lives, what their lives were like. It's a very useful source of research.
In Hearts of Horses, you made Martha kind of a big reader.
Yeah.
Where did that
I'm always
from?
making my girls big readers. Lydia in Jump Off Creek was a big reader too. Well, I wanted her to be smart, and I also wanted her to be a person who read cowboy novels, because that was a big part of what motivated her ideas about being a cowboy in the West. She wanted to be a cowboy in the West because she'd been reading all these heroic cowboy novels. That was a big part of her personality that I wanted to explore. In a way, she is sort of an alter ego for me, because I also grew up reading a lot of cowboy novels and imagining myself, wishing I was a boy so I could be a cowboy,
Yeah.
And that's where she is too, kind of at this point in her life. But she's in for a little bit of an awakening.
And that kind of does come along in the book, where she starts out a loner, or believing she is one.
Yeah.
And then as it goes along, she ends up married.
Yeah.
How were you trying to make any sort of study about marital relationships at that time?
I mentioned earlier my husband had died and I wasn't writing. I didn't write much at all for about 3 years. And when I started The Hearts of Horses, I knew that I wanted that book to be a gift to my husband. So he was a very sentimental guy who always used to tease me about the women in my novels. He would say, when are you ever going to let one of your women fall in love and get married? Because I had a hard time imagining strong women characters with, moving the plot. What if you got them married and they immediately had 12 kids, which is what happened in the West. And so I was always pushing away from that, not wanting them to get in that situation. How am I going to keep them active, heroically active, if they marry and have a bunch of kids? But I knew from the beginning that I wanted Martha to fall in love and get married by the end of that novel, and that was for my husband, for his sentimental wish. I just had to figure out how to do it so that she doesn't wind up an indoor wife with a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
It was tricky, but I did it. I think I did it.
I think so. Yeah, it really is. It's more at the end, really. But then you kind of almost don't see it coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good.
In the last paragraph of the book, which I'll have you read for us so that we have some reference.
Yeah, okay, sure. Let me read a little bit. In later years, when Martha was an old woman, as old as the Woodruff sisters had been when Martha first came into Elwha County, one of her granddaughters pointed out to her that her life had overlapped with the lives of the famous Apache Indian Geronimo and the famous Western gunslinger John Wesley Hardin, that she had seen Buffalo Bill in his fringed and beaded leathers and shock of white hair when he came through Pendleton and set up his Wild West show on the fairgrounds, and that when she was 60 years old and she and Henry were living on a ranch in northern Nevada, she had stood on her porch and watched the other show, the mushroom cloud from an A-bomb they were testing over there in the desert. And wasn't that just amazing to think about? Martha was taken aback. All her childhood dreams went flying through her mind in a moment. She remembered how, in her dreams, she had galloped bareback across fenceless prairies through grass as high as a horse's belly. She had dreamed of living like the Indians, intimate with animals, intimate with the earth. Sometimes in those dreams, just as in the Western romances, she had no name, no family ties. For a while, she had taken as her heroes the cowboys of those novels, lone horsemen, symbols of independence and freedom, who were not a bit like the cowboys she knew in her life, men whose only freedom was the right to quit at the drop of a hat and look for work on down the road. It occurred to her now that the West of her dreams was not, never could be, the testing ground for atom bombs, and she wondered how it had happened. She said to her granddaughter without planning to say it, "You know, honey, I guess we brought about the end of our cowboy dreams ourselves." It was a startling thing to hear herself say, but then she thought, here I am in my old age and just at the beginning of figuring out what that means or what to do about it. The end.
What do cowboy dreams refer to, and why did you choose to end the book this way?
I think that in all my work about the American West, I've always been grappling with the legacy of the cowboy hero. Our cowboy dreams, as she describes there, you know, we're waking up beside a mountain stream and we see a deer grazing next to our sleeping bag. In our cowboy dreams, we're riding bareback across unfenced prairies. In our cowboy dreams, our cowboy heroes are saving us from the bad guys. You know, I think of Shane, for example, which I don't know how many people now even know who Shane is, but I grew up reading and rereading that novel and imagining him as my quintessential cowboy hero. But there's a dark side to that cowboy hero. There is, and that dark side is eventually what leads to, you know, watching an atom bomb in the Nevada desert. It's because we don't take seriously our love of that land, and we let our cowboy hero solve every problem with violence. Our commitment, our love of guns, for example, I think comes right back to the cowboy hero. I think that we need to, we would all benefit if we looked harder at that cowboy dream, our heroic dream, and saw the dark side of it, which I think also has some misogyny mixed in there. The cowboy is often uncomfortable with a smart girl. He's more comfortable with the saloon girl who doesn't question his use of violence. There's a lot of complexity in that dream, and there's also a lot of good things too. I mean, he's a defender of women and animals. He's brave. His independence comes at the expense of community, though, and that needs to be examined, I guess. So that's all I was really doing at the end of that novel, is letting Martha think about those things and hoping that people reading the novel will also think about them.
You mentioned that you got back into horses when doing research for this book. Mm-hmm. So what was your history with horses prior?
Well, I didn't have a horse when I was a kid. We grew up poor and didn't ever have a horse of our own, but I had friends who had horses. So I rode a lot when I was a kid, and of course we didn't know what the heck. You know, we didn't have enough saddles to go around, so we all rode bareback, and none of us had ever had a lesson. So you know, you just kick with your heels and steer with the reins, and that's all we knew. Got bucked off a lot, got run under a laundry clothesline, and you know, all those things that happen when you're young and it doesn't hurt. You know, well, it's not the case now, but. So when I got back into horses and I took lessons and I met with these horse trainers and so on, and then began to really wish that I could be with horses, that I could have a horse, you know, be a horsewoman. And you know, it's expensive. I live in the Portland area, and it's expensive to have a horse in any kind of a boarding situation. And it's not the expense of getting the horse, but the expense of upkeep on them. But I have to say, when Hearts of Horses first came out, and I was speaking to audiences, I would talk to them about this, about my history with horses and how I was really wishing I could have a horse of my own now. And so I would finish my talks to these audiences by saying, so please, buy more books. And they did. Oh. Hearts of Horses has been really a successful novel for me, and it's brought me enough of an income that I felt that I could in fact have a horse. So now my friend Barbara and I each have a horse. They are on Sovey Island. I don't know if you know the Portland area at all, but it's a very rural community with no developments at all. And it's just a rented pasture with a small shelter, and we do all the work ourselves. So Barbara's there every morning and I'm there every night, and doing the work for the horses. And I have an Icelandic mare named Coco, and she's my heart horse. And Barbara has a Peruvian mare named Showdown. And actually by now, we've had these horses at now 8 or 9 years. We're not riding them anymore. They're both old and sick. So we're just caring for them and hoping that that we can live long enough to outlive them, because they're hanging on. They're not well, but they're hanging on. So we're out there every day, even though we're not riding anymore.
It kind of sounds like some of that translated into Hearts of Horses.
Oh, yeah.
With how Martha takes care of the horses that maybe aren't even useful anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that.
Yeah. Being around horses as I was during the writing of the novel and the research for the novel, realizing that horses have, as most animals do, as maybe you can see if my cats are wandering around through the house, that animals have their own personalities, and realizing that about horses made its way into the novel as well. Every horse in the novel has its own personality in a way.
Well, and it very much in the title,
Yeah.
The Hearts of Horses. Yeah. Last question. What books have you enjoyed recently and would be quick to recommend?
I even wrote some down because I knew that I would not be able to remember the titles otherwise, because I have a hard time remembering titles. And I really loved Ann Patchett's The Dutch House.
Weird. I'm listening to that right now. That's weird.
I listen to it. I listen to a lot of audiobooks now because I have a half-hour commute to the horses. So there and back is an hour of listening every day. So I do a lot of listening. I really love Elizabeth Wetmore's Valentine. It's a hard read. It's got some difficult stuff in it, but I really liked it a lot. I also read Wallace Stegner's, his very last novel, I think. It's called Crossing to Safety. I like that too, quite a bit. World Made by Hand, I loved because it's kind of imagining, it's not imagining, it's recreating a world pre-technological, which I liked a lot.
Yeah.
So those are some, a few.
Well, thank you, Molly.
Yeah.
I'm Jane Ellen Innes, your library director, and I hope you enjoyed the 2020 Jefferson County Virtual Community Read. If you'd like to continue the Hearts of Horses story, I recommend Molly's book, Falling from Horses. The committee would like to thank author Molly Gloss for writing a book that we all loved sharing, John Bowerman for his insights and perspective, the Adela and Sumner Rodriguez Fund, and the Jefferson County Library for their financial support, and the Friends of the Library for providing refreshments at the Chamber's Friday morning coffee cuppers. In addition, I'd like to thank the hardworking staff for producing, interviewing, filming, and editing, and specifically our in-house video expert, Swan Liu. The 2021 Community Read season is almost here. A Community Read needs community input from readers like you. You're invited to join our first meeting, tentatively scheduled for the first part of December. That's when the book selection begins. The selection parameters are a book from an author who's living in the Northwest, a book that you've read before coming to the meeting, so you can make a case for your book. The committee narrows the choices, others read the book selected, and at its second meeting in January, the committee finalizes its decisions. If you're interested, let us know by emailing or calling the library. Our contact information is on our website. The 2021 Community Read events will take place next fall. Throughout the month of October, we'll be adding additional Community Read events. Be sure to check our library website, jcld.org, to see what's coming up and where you can sign up to receive announcements for upcoming events. We look forward to seeing you in person at the 2021 Jefferson County Community Read.